coming forward so that we'll have more audience at the front. Thank you. Please, let's get seated. Let's get seated. Dr. Simon, please. Yeah, you can sit. All right. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. All right. You're all welcome to this month's FNAPE Technical Business Meeting. My name is Austin Mbemere, and by the grace of God, I'm the Publicity Secretary of FNAPE. It's our privilege and honor to have you out of your busy schedule, make our time to attend our technical meeting for a very interesting topic. And also acknowledging the fact that we also have some of our very senior industry professionals in our midst, who they will be duly recognized in the course of the technical meeting. So I just want to say a very big thank you to all of you for coming, and I would like to call on the chairman, Continuing Education Program, who is the president-elect, Mr. John Bosco Uche, to come and welcome the dignitaries and also invite the president to give his opening remark. Mr. John Bosco, sir.
Can I have the list? All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And you're really specially welcome to our monthly technical and business meeting. I mean, this is the third series we're running for this year. And we also wanted to start right now, before 11:30. I already know, I think online, we've got about over 50 people, about 50 people online. And we're glad to have you today on a special topic, which is sponsored by Harvest Geosolutions, but a speaker from Shearwater. So I will leave that for the chairman to help us in a second. But before we go ahead, in our usual tradition, I want to really welcome you and recognize the dignitaries and some key stakeholders in this room. In no particular order, before I call the president to give us his welcome remark. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Dr. Kehinde Ladipo, FNAPE, FNMGS here with us. You're welcome, sir. Dr. Kenny. And for some of us, not everybody, but some of us, we call him Baba Kenny. So but don't join me if you're not very sure. Okay, we also have here in the room our own Tony Akinosho, Africa Oil and Gas Report. He's here with us. You're welcome, sir. Also with us here is our own Chief Chambers Oyibo, FNAPE, and former BOT chairman of FNAPE. Sir, you're welcome. I might have missed it, but Tony Akinosho is FNAPE as well. Please, a round of applause for that one. Thank you. And we also have Godwin, Mr. Godwin Ochobo. Yes, he's here, FNAPE. You're welcome, sir. And then we have our own Biodun Ogunjobi, our president, FNAPE. You're welcome. Okay, the speaker for today, I also want to recognize him, especially. He's already here with us. Some of us will know he was here last year as well, in the name of Mr. Edward Hager, Head Geophysics, Shearwater. You're welcome, sir. Also, we have Mr. Peter Macaulay, who is the Managing Director of Harvest Geosolutions, the sponsor for this event. You're welcome, sir. And then the Business Development Manager for Shearwater is also here with us, Mr. Michael. You're welcome. And also the Sales Manager, Mr. Will, he's here with us as well. You're welcome. Now, for all the other members of FNAPE and friends of FNAPE, all those online, but also those here in the room, including all the ESCOs and those working at our secretariat, I want to welcome you especially. You're welcome, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, you're really welcome. Now, before I call on the president, I know I've recognized all our fellows, but I think sometimes it's also good to, still, we know FNAPE has a tradition, right? It's old history. And we know that there are some that are elders in FNAPE, some are still coming up. And I know I've recognized him before, but our own Chief Chambers Oyibo is also Elder Chambers Oyibo. So I just want to make sure I put that elder before him. All right. So I'll come back again on the stage, but allow me at this moment to call on the president of FNAPE, Mr. Biodun Ogunjabi, FNAPE, for his welcome remark. A round of applause for him.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by appreciating the fellows of FNAPE that are in the hall and also online, and also every executive member of FNAPE that are here this morning. And special thanks to Harvest Geosolution for sponsoring this morning technical business section. I want to especially welcome each and every one of us. This is one of our core values. We always create platform for knowledge sharing, for advancement in technology, and also for collaboration and networking. And we do this across all the chapters, and especially in the executive terrain that we have in Lagos. Let me also use this opportunity to appreciate Harvest Geosolution. Sometimes early this year, FNAPE signed a memorandum of understanding with Harvest Geosolution to provide geoscience software to Nigeria universities. I think they deserve an applause for that. We have been working with them, and one of our values is to see how we can strengthen the collaboration between the university and the industry. About 21 universities have been identified so far to receive this software. They will have access to rock physics software, petrophysical software, and seismic processing software. Unfortunately, not all universities have the requisite hardware to receive the software. So the ones that we have identified, we start with that, and then we reach out to our corporate member to see how we can get the hardware to some other universities so that they can also benefit from this software. So I want to appreciate Harvest Geosolution for this collaboration, and be rest assured that FNAPE will ensure adequate monitoring so that the university will put those software into proper usage. On that note, I'd like to thank everyone that is here. Please do enjoy the rest of this morning section, and I'll come back again to say thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. And as he gets back on the stage, please another round of applause for our president. All right. I want to bring on stage now our chairman for the session to make opening remark and of course introduce our speaker. But before then, I know online we do have some fellows, so I just want to quickly recognize the former president of FNAPE and one of our strong members, Mr. Elestaka, FNAPE, he's online. We also have Dr. Durobuta Bimbola, FNAPE, online as well. And we have a former president, Mrs. Adodoja Ojelabi, FNAPE, online as well. Thank you very much. Now, today, to chair the session is someone that we know quite well, but if you don't know him already, then I'm sure you get to meet him today. And that's our own Dr. Ladipo, Oluwatoyin Ladipo, FNAPE, FNMGS, and FAS. He is actually a graduate from the University of Ibadan. Actually, in 1975, he graduated. Before he went on to obtain his PhD from the University College Swansea in the United Kingdom in 1982. He's also been a researcher since he graduated and got his PhD, largely making some contribution around seeing sedimentary growth faults, and has over 50 publications, guidebooks, as well as technical reports to his credit. He actually started his time with Gulf Oil. I don't know how many of you remember Gulf Oil, but that's where he started before he went into academic career in the University of Ilorin. And he was there from 1976 until the time he left to join Shell in 1988, which is actually where I met him as one of my bosses. He's been a researcher, made a lot of contribution to understanding the petroleum exploration and production sciences, and a key custodian of knowledge on the geology of Nigeria, especially the Niger Delta, the Dahomey Basin, as well as the Cretaceous Nigeria inland basins. Just to mention that he spent a total of about 22 years working for Shell Petroleum Development Company before he then retired, and in 2010 he started StratKOL Consult as the chief executive, and he's been running that consultancy till today. For some of you that might know the Center of Excellence in Uniben, Center of Excellence in Geosciences and Petroleum Engineering, actually, Dr. Kehinde was a director for that particular school and has been a member of the Board of Trustees since between 2012 and 2015. There's a lot of accolade we have for our own Baba Kenny, but also to mention that he also spent some time working for LECOI, where he worked as senior advisor, and spending a lot of time working on Dahomey Basin. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome on stage our own Dr. Kenny Ladipo, who is a fellow of FNAPE, a fellow of NMGS, and a fellow of Academy of Science. Sir, you're welcome. All right. And you can project the biography as well for the speaker.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see good old friends and colleagues and my seniors in the profession. And also the very young I see that my former students in the Center of Excellence, Uniben, are here. It's very nice to see a broad spectrum of professionals here. I think your presence, together with those online, emphasizes the significance of the changing paradigm in our industry. Oil and gas, for which we are regard ourselves as professionals, has been facing a lot of what I would call, in double quotes, existential challenges arising from the push for climate change so that the world can meet the goal zero targets. Some say 2050, some say 2060. Some even question whether whatever targets are set by national governments, which are very often by politicians, are realistic. But fundamentally, this is driven by, in my own view, three key factors. We need to ensure energy security for our people. Every country has an obligation to ensure that they can supply enough power. What we call, and that's for me a simple way of saying energy security. That energy security is what drives economic growth. And our experience over several centuries as professionals in geology, geophysics, and so on, makes us realize that money rules the day. You need to fund technology. You need to fund your strategies and plans for providing that energy security for your people, your individual countries. One of the ways in which we as professionals are rising up to that challenge is to, in our own professional way, develop two major thrusts. One of it is what is the right energy mix. The second thing is what are the technologies that will drive an appropriate energy mix in a realizable fashion. And that brings me to the topic for today. Carbon storage, carbon sequestration, carbon capture and sequestration, or carbon capture and storage, is one of the components of ensuring that the effects of our main bread and butter as geophysicists and geologists can be mitigated. I will leave the discussion to the speaker for today, and I'll keep my views under inside the sheath of the sword to listen to him, which I'm sure all of us will be very, very keen. The technology is very apt, and therefore the topic for today is very, very apt. If you follow the trend as geoscientists in a global environment, you'll see that as the technology changes, our disciplines are also changing. And we have to learn new tricks of the trade. We have to understand them. We have to know how to apply them. So, Mr. Ed Hager, or should I say Dr. Ed Hager, we're all very keen and ready to listen to you. Your career started with Western Geophysical in 1991. And then you moved on to data processing, survey design with Western GECO. And you became the regional manager for the Middle East and Africa in 2014. Subsequently, you joined Polacross And I remember in my last semi-permanent job with StratKOL, I remember dealing with polar cross on a couple of geophysical projects. Your experience covers a wide spectrum in the world, from Africa, and I'm sure Singapore, and also in the North Sea. And more recently, you became the chief geophysicist for Shearwater Geoservices. Let me also say that you are also in partnership, your company is also in partnership with Shearwater. So you have a very rich background, and we all look forward to a very rich enlightenment lecture from you. In my closing remarks, I will give the appreciation. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Edward Hager to deliver his talk.
Right. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the chairman, the president and president-elect for such a great introduction, and other distinguished members of FNAPE. So good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about, the title of my talk today is about capturing the future, the geology and geophysics of carbon storage. So this is really just going to be an introduction. I'll cover Shearwater's journey as part of our learnings over the last few years since we started in the carbon capture market. So just a quick introduction of what Shearwater and who we are. We're basically a seismic company. We research and develop and manufacture seismic equipment. We acquire data through our survey vessels, and we process and image data as well. And finally, we have our reveal processing software, which you may have heard we also install, not for just commercial reasons, we also give to institutions for the young people to learn about seismic processing and imaging, of which there are now already quite a few licenses available within Nigeria. So as a company, we have a worldwide footprint. We're based in Bergen. We have our research and development in Oslo for acquisition. We have research and development for processing and imaging in the London office. And otherwise, as you can see, we have processing centers around the world, including a center here in Lagos, which is hosted by Harvex Geosolutions. So moving on from that, we're going to have a quick introduction with the CCS and what some of the drivers are on a worldwide level. And then I'll talk a little bit about things like the fluids phase, some of the issues of containment and so on of carbon capture. So what are the demand drivers for CCS? Essentially, they are promises made by governments on trying to achieve net zero. Governments and companies are pushing their own agendas, their own timeframes to achieve net zero. Each country is declared, or nearly every country has declared when they want to reach net zero. Some might be 2030, some 2040, 50, 60, and so on. And that depends on the status of the country and what the governments believe we can deliver. And I say we, it's going to be people in this room that are going to be able to deliver a large part of these requirements. So, as you can see, at the moment, we're predicted to be able to require to store 8 gigatons per annum of CO2 by 2050. Now that's a lot, basically. Our current capacity in the world is about 45 million tons. So we've got a significant order of magnitude, 2 or 3 orders of magnitude problem to solve over the next 20 or 30 years. Currently, of course, the projects that are underway are essentially test projects, and we're only now just entering the phase of where these are going to become more larger and will start to accumulate more significant amounts of carbon. But we're still probably at the moment still looking at millions of tons. Some countries have other ways of reducing their carbon emissions. It's not all going to be about sequestering carbon. It could be reducing other emissions. Flaring, for example, is a good example, and probably most relevant to West Africa as a whole and in part to Nigeria. Use of alternative energies, hydro, again, something that occurs in Nigeria but maybe not be possible in other countries. UK is trying to go to wind farms, for example. So it's not just about storing the carbon, it's about generating the energy in other ways. But all solutions for every country must maintain energy security for those countries. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So what's the value of geophysics in the CCS life cycle? One of the principal things we're going to need to do is define sites to actually store the CO2. And we might do that by a number of ways. We might repurpose old legacy data, i.e. we're going to reprocess it, but we're going to reprocess it looking at different zones before. I mean, obviously, when you're processing seismic data, you're probably caring more about the structure and the reservoir of your target as opposed to maybe the overburden, for example. We might also look at new 3D and 4D acquisitions, could have a modification to the survey design to enable the possibility of using that data set in the future for site identification. So here we're talking typically improving the near offset distribution, the fold and the shallow and the like, and that sort of thing. And you could do that basically as an add-on. And the point here would be to have these things as an incremental cost, if not basically included with the survey. So it's really about thinking about every survey and maybe in a new light. There's also the site characterization pre-injection. So a lot of the places we might choose to put carbon, aquifers for example, are formations in terms of geology that were, well, historically just drilled through trying to get to our oil or gas target. So we've maybe not paid that much attention. We might be able to name the formation, we might be able to understand its stratigraphy, its timing, its depositional environment, but its variability, its porosity, its permeability might not be known. So we're probably going to have to look at seismic data and reinterpret it, run quantitative interpretation and the like, to be able to define these geologies a little bit better and therefore work out whether they're actually suitable for injection or not. And of course, as part of that site characterization, and quite important, is to understand the containment risks for any particular area. So that's the seal competency, what are the fault patterns like, and things like that. And I'll cover that a bit more later on. And of course, then finally, to monitor the injection, monitoring the storage, and monitoring that the containment is happening. And then finally, at the end of life, when you've filled up your reservoir, or your storage medium with CO2, that there are no leaks, because in most, well, so far from what I've seen, at the end of life, usually, for now, most governments will take over the management of that storage facility, as it were, so they'll keep on monitoring. But presumably, before a government will take over a particular site, whenever that time might be, they're going to want to have proof that it is actually contained and there's no leaking, the seal's there, and it will remain so for some time. And of course, research and development here is very key. So research could be algorithmic, it could be looking at the numbers, it could be looking at new forms of FWI, for example, or it could just be looking at the equipment that we have already and repurposing it, rethinking about it. And that's certainly a lot of where the effort has been from Shearwater, has been looking at how we can use our what we already have to its maximum effect. And the reason we might choose to do that is if we start developing new technologies, that comes with a cost, which eventually would be passed on one way or another to the operators. And we don't really want that. We're trying to make CCS as cheap as possible. And that's the key thing here, to make it efficient so that we're not a barrier to the whole process. And the process is a big process. The process will involve a lot of elements, companies, be they oil and gas, be they cement works, fertilizers, whoever creates CO2, to the final point where it's stored underground. And so there's capturing, there's liquefaction, there's transport and injection of that. And of course somebody needs to pay for all of that. So Shearwater has got quite a lot of experience. Most of the surveys that have been shot for carbon capture we've been involved with. So we processed the data for the endurance survey. We've just acquired Total Energies, the Bifrost in Denmark. We've shot data for ENI in Liverpool Bay, which I'll talk about a little bit later. We've repurposed and re-imaged data for Perenco. Similarly for IMPEX, we also shot a carbon capture survey for IMPEX. I think we might be processing it, but I'm not sure. And in fact, as we speak, we're currently shooting a survey in the Irish Sea, in Morecambe Bay actually, in the Irish Sea, using our isometrics technology on behalf of Spirit Energy. So we're quite active in this. And it's these learnings that have been driving where we are so far, but those learnings will, I hope you understand, will change as we look at new markets, Nigeria being an example. So moving on a little bit about the basics of CO2. Once we get to the stage of injecting it, it's not a gas. There's a great paper by Phil Ringrose, which is titled Why CCS is Not Reverse Gas Engineering, which explains some of the finer details of this. But if we look on the picture on the left, we have what actually CO2 would be like. It's basically like olive oil in water, and it's not dissolved as a gaseous solution like that, well, I guess it's a glass of champagne. And that will have implications for how the reservoir engineers will plan their injections, pressures and all of that sort of thing. That's well outside of my competence, but it does mean that we have to recognize that what we did before might not necessarily work in the future. The other really important part is understanding the CO2 phase diagram. Well, actually, we only need to know one thing, 800 meters. And that is the depth at which CO2 is critical in the subsurface. So with that particular pressure and temperature, we're at the critical point where CO2 will remain a liquid underground. And shallower than that, it will be trying to turn to gas, and it will take a much, much larger volume. So it'll be incredibly inefficient to try and store it in that form. So all the reservoirs you'll see that have been spoken about so far are at least 800 meters deep. And one of the classic ones that's been operating for about 20 years now is the Sleipner Reservoir. As you can see, that's one of the shallowest, and it's bang on 800 meters. And obviously that was no accident. Other reservoirs could be deeper. In fact, most of them will be. Some very, very deep. Some might be depleted. Reservoirs. But with that minimum depth of CO2 storage, we understand a limit to where we need to understand the geology, at least for the storage. And that will drive the geophysics of any sort of survey design, acquisition and processing. And finally, just to quote Mr. Ringrose again, Dr. Ringrose, is that CO2 has a gas-like viscosity and a liquid-like density. And again, that speaks to that we can't just somehow think this is going to be something like modifying how we might, well, inject, how we might modify how we might be thinking when it's like a gas reservoir with methane, for example. So there's several kind of storage geologies that people have envisaged, and we've actually pretty much already done surveys for most of them, actually. So you might have shallow aquifers, obviously below the 800 meter mark, as I've just said. That's a very popular target. You might have slightly deeper aquifers in, your traditional anticlinal structures. You might have reservoirs in depleted gas or oil fields, be they shallow ones or deep. Whatever you're going to need, though, is some sort of seal. And that's one interesting point to make, that if you're going to explore in an aquifer, do you know that the seal is competent? Do you know the seal is actually effective? In a depleted oil and gas field, you know the seal was there, obviously, because there's a gas accumulation. So if you put CO2 back in, you would hope that the seal would still be competent. But is the reason there was no accumulation in this particular structure because the gas, oil, whatever, seeped and was never held? So then you might say you might need a different sort of level of understanding actually for an aquifer than you might for a depleted reservoir. And again, that speaks to the how you might design the survey and how you might think about that survey as well, and how much you need to understand critically the overburden above that. So we basically have two scenarios, mostly shallow aquifers and depleted reservoirs. There's one exception, the Northern Lights project, led by Equinor and others in the North Sea. The Norwegian North Sea is actually a deep aquifer. So far, that's actually the only one that I know of that's actually a deep aquifer. Mostly, the deeper plays are depleted reservoirs. But as I said about shallow aquifers, we might need to understand geology that we've never really considered before. As I said, it could just be a drilling hazard that you've been thinking of, and now we're going to try and use it and understand the geology at a completely different level to what we might have done before. Let's say the top seal competency is uncertain. As I mentioned, there might be no hydrocarbons because they've already disappeared. The seal might not be good. So a lot of companies, for example, might look at this and go, well, if we're not sure about the seal above the reservoir, above the storage, we might hedge our bets and have another sandstone, another shale or salt or whatever to act as a seal above that. So there's an escape. It's got somewhere else to go in some other formation that can trap it and somehow hedge the bets that way. Faulting is obviously a big question. Are you going to reactivate faults that will allow leakage to the surface? But the good thing about shallow aquifers is there's a lot of them. And there's also, inevitably, there's going to be shallow aquifers that are near the CO2 producing industries, which is certainly the model we've seen so far in the UK, will be the case in the US and Norway, and for that part, well, actually all of the North Sea, to be honest, where the idea is that we try and get the storage site as close as possible to the to wherever it's going to be sequestered. There are some exceptions to this. I'll go through them later. So there are risks with depleted reservoirs. One of the biggest is actually poorly capped wells from legacy production. And even if they are capped wells, the steel used is maybe not sufficient for protecting against the very acidic or relatively acidic CO2 environment. So they could then cause failures later on, and you can actually be letting your gas out that way. But there is a bonus. Generally, depleted reservoirs We actually, of course, know traditional seismic geometries work, traditional seismic acquisition works, because that's probably how they were discovered and developed already. And of course, just to go to the top point, we know the geology and the reservoir characteristics very well after many years of production. So this is just like a pictorial representation of the sort of containment risk we might have. The biggest one probably is the activation or reactivation of faults that will somehow reduce the seal competency. And there's many papers discussing some of those issues. But as I said, one of the biggest ones I've seen, or one of the concerns I've seen for many companies, be they large ones or small ones, is the idea that the wells yourself could be the weakest point in the chain, and that the fluids can escape through that, breach the seal, and then start to go into the overburden. How big a problem that is, I'm not really sure. I know companies who are definitely avoiding any area that's got too many wells already in there, especially in North America as well. Other companies seem less concerned. So here's an example of the overburden in the Northern Endurance Partnership, which is a cluster of companies that's come together to which produce CO2, which then want to sequester it and then store it underground, which is generally the UK model. So the costs are really shared between many different emitters. The storage and injection would be handled by BP in this case as part of that partnership. So this is an example of data actually that was repurposed. The actual storage location will be in these formations here, the Bunter Sandstone. And even though this data has been somewhat improved by reprocessing, this top section here, the top maybe kilometer maybe, is still not that well imaged. We can see obviously faults there. We're not really clear whether they go to the surface or where they terminate or what sort of medium they terminate into. So after looking at the reprocessing, well, after initially choosing the location based on the legacy data, the reprocessing to see what they could get out of it, it was determined that an additional survey needed to be shot. The company that acquired the data came up with some great solutions, which really improved the ability to image that shallow section, and Shearwater processed it. I can't show those images yet. They'll be available after the EAG in June, which is in Oslo, annual meeting in Oslo this year. But the new acquisition and processing really cleans up this top section, and you can really see the extent of the faults and where they stop, which of course is very important to understand if you're going to be injecting right at the crest of the anticline. So the biggest question that still exists in the CCS world is how we're going to do the monitoring. And it's a big question because it's about cost and it's also what we are trying to find out. And those two things are actually quite uncertain. I mean, yes, we want to prove that it stays underground. We want to monitor how maybe the fluids are moving, because obviously we want to maybe change injection pressures. We might want to change, put new wells in and the like. We might be going too hard. If you think about reverse gas version, you might want to produce at the optimum rate. In this case, you want to inject at the optimum rate. So current industry leaders in terms of monitoring are DAS, without a doubt. So that's distributed acoustic sensing. So this is when you use a fiber optic cable as your geophone or hydrophone as your receiver. And the reason this idea is popular is that optic fiber is relatively cheap. So the idea would be to put a network of optic fiber around your reservoir. This is both land and marine environments. Bury it, and then every so often come along and just acquire, with the source vessel, a repeat survey to monitor the effects of the injection. So very much like a permanent reservoir monitoring system, but way cheaper. And then we have other sort of monitoring ideas, Spotlight. which was developed, sorry, I forgot about the company now in the university, but what Spotlight is that you choose a point on the reservoir, you have one source and one receiver, and you keep repeating that one source and receiver. You have one trace, basically. And what you do is you model what that trace will change like as the fluid front or the pressure front moves through. And then you keep monitoring until you see that actually occur. And you know that you're on target, basically. And of course, the idea here is that if you only have one source and one receiver, it's a very, very cheap seismic acquisition. The next one, actually they're not really in good order, would be passive seismic is also a very clear favorite. And here the idea is that we monitor with a few geophones or hydrophones or whatever, the creaking and groaning of the reservoir. What we're trying to find there is to see whether there's any activation of faults, for example, would be a classic passive seismic target. So you can basically monitor the production without actually any acquisition at all. So obviously it's a very cheap solution. Of course, there is the classic seismic 4D that occurs in most places, Nigeria included, where we just repeat the seismic and we difference it, and we'll see what that's like. I've got a study that the NSDA, the North Sea Transition Authority, commissioned from Geoscience, which I will show you in a minute why that might not be necessarily the best solution. There are cases where you might, either for repeat of 4Ds, you might use streamer or an OBN, but you might not necessarily need to do a full repeat of the 3D. You might only need to do 2D sampling, because you're basically just trying to see a difference. You're just trying to see whether there's anything has changed on the subsurface that you didn't expect. So 2D data might be sufficient. And I know at least one company is looking at this OBN idea as quite an efficient way of doing this. So a few 2D lines are going to be much, much easier to acquire, very quick to acquire, as compared to a full 3D survey, be it streamer or OBN. And then there's things, you can get these incredibly sensitive gravity measurement devices now that measure nano-Gs. So they can probably record 1 to 2 centimeter deviation, deformation, either on the seabed or on land as well. So that's a possibility for monitoring. And then finally, there's considerations for EM and resistivity. But for that to work, it has to be actually quite shallow in order to be able to check relatively small change in the effect of CO2 on the aquifer's resistivity. So when it comes to monitoring, a lot of companies, a lot of people in the industry immediately go to the Sleipner CCS capture project. This project was started, I think, over 20 years ago, and the deal with Sleipner was that they were producing methane, but with a lot of CO2. And the idea was that they would siphon off the CO2 and re-inject it on the well site in order to sweeten the gas and send it direct to market, basically. Now, Sleipner, this is a 4D, so this is 1999, and almost 10 years later, we have a repeat. It's fairly evident here where the gas was, and you can see after 10 years how much it's expanded. It's very clear. I mean, you can take some pretty poor quality data, and you'd be able to difference those two and find those differences. The thing is, not everything is like Sleipner, which is why we're going to look at some of this modeling here. And as I said, this was commissioned by the NSDA in the UK and performed by Geoscience. So they modeled the response, the 4D response at the start of the injection and the end of life of the injection, whatever that period is, 10 years, 20 years, or whatever. And when we look at Sleipner, we can see there's a very strong response, and of course that's echoed in the seismic data, that's fairly clear. We look at endurance in the southern North Sea, we actually can see there's actually a pretty pretty reasonable response. We wouldn't need anything too special to discern that on a 4D job. Standard 4D would do nicely. However, this is after almost 25 years of injection or something like that. So is there any point in going back there after 5 years? You barely see any difference at all. And this is the Lennox survey, which is shot in the ENI near Liverpool Bay, which we did the survey for. And in fact, here the difference is very, very small indeed. So you might do an interim 4D, let's say, for the endurance project, but you certainly won't do it for Lennox. There's just no point. You're not going to see anything. So what does that mean? It means that we might, in some cases, completely discount our traditional 4D response. We're only going to look at passive seismic. We will probably need to do a final 4D at the end of life just to show that the containment is as predicted, and hopefully the signal will look like that and everyone's happy. The government of the nation will take that over, and then the operators can walk away from the storage, the responsibility of that storage. Because nobody's going to take on decades or 100 years worth of responsibility for something. So really every government's going to come to that conclusion sooner or later, that they have to accept that they'll be the ultimate owners of all these storage sites and have to manage them. So we could still use seismic because we may not be interested or be able to detect these small changes, but we might be very, it'd be very likely for us to detect, even with some poor quality seismic or not too dense seismic. If the gas is breached, it's going through the seal, it turns into its gaseous form, it will light up like Slidner, and we can see that with 2D, we can see that with very sparse 3Ds, for example. It won't be hard to spot, especially as it wasn't there before. Any differences must be attributed to the escape of CO2. So now I'm going to move a little bit on to Shearwater's journey and the sort of geophysics that we've been thinking about and what we've been doing in adjusting our acquisition, processing, and imaging. But one thing I know for certain, that our journey so far won't be your journey going forward. Every country, every geology, every basin will have its unique path it will need to take, and the timings of those paths will be very, very different. And of course, it will depend on the companies, the governments, and not only, and the geopolitical situation, and of course, things like energy security as to how much effort and when that effort will be applied, and the economics, of course. So we can look at a couple of different scenarios from a geophysical point of view. So here we have 4 surveys. The top right one here is Total Energy's Bifrost survey off Denmark. Here we have the Northern Lights partnership, which is off Norway, mainly handled by Equinor, but by other companies as well. We have Liverpool Bay, so it's not a great slide, I'm afraid. That's Liverpool Bay there, and that's Liverpool. And then we have the Endurance Partnership. So what's the difference between these? Well, the Bifrost survey and the the Northern Lights surveys were relatively deep. They were in deep water and they were deep targets. That means the acquisition technologies that were deployed were relatively standard, typical oil and gas basically, because they meet the requirements for those particular areas. These two are probably the exception. Most, for now at least, are these projects where we're exploring and looking to find storage sites that are close to the producing industries. Some of these, Northern Endurance Partnership is like a gas power station, but also includes a chemical factory and a cement works, and it's fairly similar for HyNet as well, which is the name of the partnership in the Liverpool Bay region. But these both are in shallowish water and require high resolution data. So what can we say then about the geophysics of CCS? What are we trying to do? Well, there's potentially a very hard to see 4D signal, so we have to make sure that the surveys we do run are repeatable and they're suitable for 4D in the future, however long that future might be, if it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We need to be thinking of that right from the start. We need to think about the overburden risks, and that's probably true of both shallow aquifers and deep depleted reservoirs, where we, as already discussed, we have to think about the faults, the seal competency. We also have to think about secondary seals, secondary reservoirs to capture any leaks should they occur. And essentially, we're trying to ideally image the surface. Now, that's not always going to be possible. There are limits to how efficient, I mean, we can do it from a geophysical point of view, but trying to do it where we're actually efficient and we don't add an undue burden to the cost of the operation. So far, our path has been to improve the quality of the baseline, make it more efficient, and also to look at technologies that really help to repurpose legacy data, which could act as a baseline, but it will certainly be necessary for site identification. So in this slide, I wanted to talk about maybe some of the finer details, so the numbers aren't particularly clear. So we can think of 3 scenarios from a geophysical seismic point of view at least. Exploration, standard resolution seismic, CCS, high resolution seismic, and then at the other end of the spectrum, ultra high resolution seismic, which you might use for wind farm characterization. Sometimes these two are, sometimes these two can be linked, or indeed the exploration and the CCS targets. If you're doing exploration or 4D, you could upgrade them a little bit to get to CCS. So you could be looking here at the bottom left there at targets 2 to 4 kilometers maybe for oil and gas, maybe on 100 hertz frequency top end, and with maybe resolutions in the tens of meters range. High resolution seismic, much smaller bins, much higher frequencies, you might get 150, 200 hertz, who knows. But we're basically looking for much smaller features. We're looking for smaller faults because those are the things that are going to keep us up at night, which might fail. And then, well, if we look at ultra high resolution, we're looking at sub-meter resolutions, tiny little bin size, meter-sized bin size, and very, very high frequency for the seismic, kilohertz frequencies. So for us, as an acquisition company, what certainly keeps us up is the water depth and how that affects the survey design. And by that I mean really how efficient we can make the survey. We're worried about things with increasing the damage in sea equipment, the efficiency as we get narrow geometries, as we get into shallower water. Actually, an important one is the reducing the streamer length, because in some cases we're going to want QI products, and we're going to maybe, even though it's shallow water, we might want to see a relatively deep depleted reservoir. So we need to have enough offsets to do the QI, we need enough offsets to do the 4D differencing as well. So these things concern us. So one of the things, and really the best solution for us, is to solve the acquisition geometries by making them more efficient and improving the near offset distribution. That's kind of key to imaging the shallow. And that would be the case if you're even in deep water, if you're trying to image, you're running a deep water 4D example, you might want to improve that top kilometer resolution by having better near offset distribution. So it's not necessarily just in shallow water, it's just much harder for us to do in shallow water. And this is not a great diagram here. This is like a shot at a streamer acquisition. I must see if I can improve that. But that blue here is a lead-in that goes from the vessel to the seismic streamer. And in yellow, it's not so clear, is a gun umbilical. And you can see here there's points in the modeling software that's telling us that the two are going to touch. For us, that's not a good thing. Ruining our equipment, having downtime because we have to keep fixing it, is definitely no good for anyone. So we have to sort of solve these sorts of problems in order to provide the acquisition efficiencies that are really necessary to reduce our costs to the bare minimum. So from a geophysical point of view then, why do we want to do this? Well, we want to acquire near offsets to get that overburden imaging as good as possible, which means improving the spatial and temporal sampling as well. And I would say also the positioning quality. There's no point in having 100 hertz superfine data if you can't really position it accurately on the surface. So that's also an important thing. So essentially what we're talking about is wide tow sources. This is when, wide tow sources is when we tow our sources outside the inner streamers, and this improves significantly the near offset distribution. I'll show you that in a minute. So as a sort of way of dealing with this internally and explaining how things are worked to our clients, we kind of split up our, well, we call it our acquisition toolkit and how we think about things. So we might think about ultra shallow, less than 10 meters, very shallow, shallow, and then deeper water. And in each case, there's going to be a change in the way we tow our equipment and the sort of efficiencies that we can hope to obtain with that particular water depth in mind, and the fact that we have to manage our equipment and not let it break. And with those sort of efficiencies in acquisition, there's also these geophysical parameters where you might want a particular minimum or maximum near offset for each different water range. As you get deeper in the water, you can have longer offsets. And as you get deeper in the water, or shallow, whichever one you look at it, you want to make your bin smaller and smaller and smaller as you get into the shallower water, and you want to improve your resolutions of your overburden. So here's an example, it's a physics slide, as an example of the effect of wide tow sources. So this is a geometry we're looking at. So we can see here, we've got 7 streamers, 50 meters apart, and we have 4 sources. And what I want you to look at here is this orange line. So this is the near offset distribution you get for multiple passes of the cell line. So the yellow is one acquisition line, and then you have an acquisition line either side, sorry. And these are the sorts of near offsets you get. You're getting, what, 120, 130 meters near offsets at the edge of the spread. So if you're running this in 15 meters of water, you're really not going to see the seabed. You're not going to really image much to any degree of accuracy until you're several hundred meters below the seabed, which is not much use. If we look at the comparison, if we now tow these sources wide, we can see now our near offset distribution is massively improved. And this is the sort of thing we're looking at to try and get the most out of our equipment. It's not even about inventing new things, it's about new techniques that we've just not had to really think about until CCS came along. And what we're trying to do in all of this is to get this number as high as possible for a given water depth. So that's the cell line spacing. The wider the cell line spacing, the less cell lines, the faster we acquire, and the cheaper the survey will be. We can always shoot a survey somewhere. We can always achieve way better results than what I've got here, but the cost is narrow spreads, which are very slow to acquire and will take a long time. So this is what we're trying to achieve. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience in the Liverpool Bay. What I want you to take away from this is how we approach things, how we might be able to provide solutions. It won't look like this. I want you just to think about what a company like Shearwater can sort of bring to the party when it comes to innovation and a way of thinking about stuff. So as shallow water acquisition goes, seismic companies, all the major ones, haven't been working in shallow water for a very long time. Mostly we've been focusing on large surveys in deepish water as exploration, gas and oil, has moved deeper and deeper offshore. So for many of us, we haven't really worked much in shallow water for 30 years, myself included. So we had to look at things in an entirely new way. And of course, there are particular risks associated with shallow water. Obvious things like the bathymetry, we don't want to hit anything. Currents, weather windows, tidal shooting can be critical. Obstructions, fishing, of course, is always a problem everywhere. Shipping because a lot of these surveys are going to be close to major ports, pilot areas which control where the ship's pilots control the ship and how it can go into certain restricted areas. Certainly in the North Sea and the Irish Sea, we have to think about unexploded ordnance, which is still sitting there on the seabed, which can provide a hazard. And you really don't want to level off a big seismic source next to an old Second World War bomb. We have things like sea cables, so they could be power cables, but could also be fiber optics and the like. So then we think about our task, is obviously to think about spread design and efficiency in these circumstances. But some of the other things we've had to learn about or think about are things like how employment visas work, how your crew can actually operate in these waters. Because generally we're operating outside of the 12 nautical miles, which is the limit in the UK for using typical seaman's tickets, like most of our crews have. Suddenly you get within a certain boundary, and of course these will be different for every country, and suddenly you need a different sort of visa type, which might take you months to obtain for your crew. So you have to maybe be thinking way ahead in terms of an operational thing. And then in the US, you might have differences between the state and federal licenses. And here's an example, actually. This is the Bly turning around from a wind farm. So these are also new obstructions that we didn't have to face, things like wind farms. So here's the sort of location of this E&I. So we shot 2 surveys. This is the port of Liverpool. So there's a lot of shipping traffic. This is a heat map of the shipping traffic coming out. So we have container ships, we have ferries, we have service boats for the oil and gas operations, service boats for the wind farms. There's a lot going on. We have storage facilities to avoid. We have the legacy platforms, which not only provide an obstruction, they also were being decommissioned at the time. So you have a decommissioning company really in control of these, not the oil company itself. So there's activity related to that. We're obviously trying to avoid wind farms and the like. So most of this we could acquire with a streamer, but the very shallow part we had to use node on a rope, OBN. It was less than 10 meters deep. So we couldn't really bring in one of our standard acquisition vessels. So what we did, we designed and implemented both the survey design and also modified 2 vessels, multi-purpose vessels. These are little barges basically with a very shallow draft that are suitable to operate in these waters. We made one a source boat, one a node on a rope boat, and these were used to execute this relatively small node on a rope survey as part of the reservoir characterization exercise. The other thing the client wanted was very accurate geomorphology of the near surface. So they used side scan sonar, or rather they wanted side scan sonar, they wanted multi-beam echo sounder, sub-bottom profiler data to be acquired at the same time. And we used X-Ocean, which used these tiny little unmanned surface vehicles to record those data sets. So these are very, very efficient. This is a very, very efficient way of acquiring that data. These are actually not autonomous. They're remotely piloted, so they're always under control of a human, wherever they may be sitting. And the data quality is measured by a second operator. And these were able to acquire that data very efficiently. And of course, these vessels have much lower health and safety exposure, basically because there's no one on board, and a very low carbon footprint in their own right. So it's using these sorts of technologies that not only are very effective, are also very cost effective and safe to do. And of course, there was a lot of engineering and thought into producing these bespoke designs. And even then, we tasked X-Ocean further. This is the node layout we put down. And sometimes these nodes in some of these areas at low tide would be down to about 2 meters water with very, very high currents. So quite rightly, the client was concerned about the movement of these nodes during acquisition, which is obviously a bad thing. So the solution here was to put an ultra-short baseline positioning system, USBL system, on the bottom of this little, one of these unmanned vehicles. and it could just sit there quite efficiently, going up every day, checking the position of the nodes, making sure they hadn't moved, and if they had moved, we'd be able to locate them very, very quickly and then deal with it whichever way is appropriate. As it turned out, they didn't actually move, so that was good. But we knew that before we picked up the nodes, and we didn't have any shocks in processing later on, which might have been difficult to deal with. And finally, our technologies also on the reimaging and repurposing of data. So this is a work we did for Searcher, a multi-client company in India, who were looking to reuse old seismic 2D data, or not, well, it's not actually that old, but use some 2D data to, one, improve the deeper imaging for the oil and gas targets, but at the same time to improve the shallow to identify potential CCS targets. And this is the result of our processing over the legacy processing. And this is maybe a few hundred milliseconds you're looking at here in total depth from the seabed. And it's fairly evident what you can get by applying the latest technology really, really well, the sort of improvements you can get here. I mean, also the deeper targets will improve, but for this talk, mainly the sort of shallow imaging. And it's from this that we can probably draw conclusions about potential storage sites and their risks, which would be much harder from this image. So certainly for site identification, this is really good. So it's not just acquisition technology, we're also looking at how we can apply and concentrate our processing and imaging efforts on the shallow part of the section. So, conclusions. We certainly can find geophysical solutions to carbon storage. We just need to make them very efficient. So far, our focus has been on shallow water, high resolution seismic, because that's what clients have been asking us for. Generally because the storage needs to be near the CO2 generation facilities. Monitoring is a very open topic, and I think we're going to have to wait for governmental regulations to be a little bit more clear, and then we will find the cheapest solution that meets those governmental regulations, as we do now, quite frankly, in any circumstance. But of course, the bottom here is the most important part. Each country will have its own unique challenges, its own timeframes, will need its own bespoke solutions. I feel as a company, we've certainly demonstrated we have the ability and also the will to research, use our research capabilities, our experience and ideas, maybe more importantly, to help develop these solutions going forward. So with that, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ed. Another round of applause for Mr. Ed. All right. Just can you have a seat? And I know, but just to help us to moderate the next session, the chairman is joining us already, Dr. Kehinde Ladipo, who is the chairman for today. So he's going to help us to give a summary and then also guide us through the Q&A as well. Okay? All right, thank you, Mr. President. And now you're here, I think, yes, we need you here as well. All right. So let me also invite the sponsor, the Managing Director of Geoharvest, Mr. Peter Macaulay. Please join us here. Thank you. And Mr. Michael Millington, the BDM Shearwater, join us as well. Thank you. All right, so we're just going to switch to the Q&A, but before then, I will hand the mic over to the chairman to give us a summary, and then once we are done, then we'll now switch over to the other things. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My brain works better when I'm standing. I think that's Thank you, Ed, for your presentation. I've listened to quite a few in my time, and I think this is not just a presentation for winning jobs, but also letting us know some of the technicalities that are involved. I'll just raise a couple of points. First of all, it would be nice to see, together with your partner, Shearwater, presence of your capabilities in Nigeria and perhaps the whole of West Africa. So when you show the map in a short while, you know, the Gulf of Guinea and in particular Nigeria will be one of those landmark spots where these technologies can be have been applied on the globe. It's also nice to hear about the support to Nigerian universities that you are offering. Been very much involved in capacity development for most of my career as well. I think it is very laudable. I'll take just a very few summaries from what you have. You've shown us how a lot of the technologies are already existing. But you've laid emphasis on a couple of salient points. How the improved data acquisition techniques can add value, particularly when it comes to managing what we all know, like I said in the beginning, the existential challenges that our industry faces. So, apart from the acquisition, the processing steps, we also went into detail, focusing especially on the shallow reservoirs versus the deep. The extent to which that can be taken in the Niger Delta needs to be investigated further because the stratigraphic architectures of our reservoirs and our geology varies tremendously. I like the fact that you recognize the differences not only between basins, but let me also add that it can also differ according to the geology and also perhaps to some extent the fields in the Niger Delta. We'll come to the details of that later on or rather privately. One of the points that you raised, particularly when it comes to how you process, is forward modeling in your acquisition and processing technologies. Forward modeling is something that we do on a routine basis as our integrated workflow. Either you're doing geophysics or geology. But more importantly is that our workflows now have become completely integrated. I think the lines between, the boundaries between what is geology and what is geophysics is fading away completely. But it's important to recognize some of the factors that you did mention. Which we need to take. Let me just highlight 2 points that comes to my mind. You mentioned about the behavior of our faults in your talk, which is very important. In my career, providing technical services to exploration and development, false seal behavior, false characterization and behavior is very important. I like your figure that shows the relationship between pressure and is it temperature on CO2, the phase behavior of CO2s. What we need to also understand is what will be the application of that understanding if we understand the geochemistry of the gas, for which there's a lot of information. How much of methane do we have versus the CO2, for example, how they differ depending upon the level of the reservoirs. You also mentioned something on the rock fluid behavior. You didn't expand so much on that, which but it's something to be delved into. The methodologies of which you described are very apt. How do you identify the site for localizing your sequestration, the sequestration of the gases that are produced? How do you characterize the reservoirs? Gas injection is a routine process in Niger Delta fields. From geology to geophysics, applying 4D seismic on a routine basis. What it will be interesting to see is that how frequently do you need to acquire new seismic similar to 4D in order to be able to monitor the behavior of the reservoirs in time. I will leave a couple of other points which I think will be research and development challenges when we've gotten some further questions for you to answer from the audience. Maybe after that, I'll also ask you a couple of further questions that can help corporate organizations and regulatory bodies in Nigeria, the oil and gas industry in Nigeria, on how they can better manage gas from Nigerian fields. Interestingly enough, about a year and a half ago, I did a summary to the Renewable Energy Society of Nigeria. And you'll be surprising to a lot of people here that there are 14, I think it's 12 or 14 cement industries in Nigeria, and they contribute almost 15 to 20% of the CO2. So it's amazing. So this technology, in terms of how do you capture and store CO2 emissions, is not only for oil and gas, but also to the cement industry. Just around between 50 and 60 kilometers from Lagos, we have about 4 different cement factories. Dangote has 2. Around close to Aberdeen, Lafarge is there at Ladipo. There's another one on the way to Shearwater. Just 4 within 50 kilometers radius, of, half radius of Lagos in the state. So you can see that there are enormous challenges, and there are also major areas where this technology can be applied. And shallow seismic is something that will not all investigating. I'm delving into research and development initiatives here, particularly for the younger ones. Before I forget, let me just say that those of you younger ones who are trying to carbon capture and sequestration is very, very topical in this country now. And I hope you have been able to understand and appreciate how your basic knowledge of geology and geophysics can be applied to add value to the subject and to your knowledge base. What I know right now is that I've not seen any geoscientists trying to take advantage of these opportunities in terms of knowledge development and technology applications. So, I will open the floor for questions to Ed. When I sit down, please raise your hand and I will call people. And then for our colleagues who are online, after about 10 minutes of questioning from here, we'll ask for questions. I'm sure the IT people there can either make the questions audible or bring it and I will read it out to Ed to give his answers. Thank you. So, questions? Yeah. Mr. Kinshu, FNAPE.
Morning again. Oh, sorry, we're now in the afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Hager. Thank you, Chairman, for that very comprehensive summary. I mean, some of the things you picked, I didn't pick, especially the temperature and pressure profile that you mentioned. My worry, I mean, as you kept on talking, was that you identified, two key reservoirs, and they are either depleted deep reservoirs, which are, depleted hydrocarbon reservoirs, or shallow aquifers. That one, and that you seem to be tilting towards the shallow aquifers. It looks like that was your preferred type of reservoir. But in a world that, is running out of clean water to drink, why would you be putting carbon dioxide in impossible drinking water, essentially? That's really my major question. The second one is not part of this. Shearwater was trying to, you don't show up in Africa at all. Your maps basically put you everywhere else but Africa, including even when you work for Perenco, which is essentially an African operator. You don't work for them on the continent. So why are you not here? Thank you.
Well, yes, you've got a very good point, the shallow aquifers. The drivers for the shallow aquifers aren't necessarily Shearwater's choices, it's the choices of those the groups of companies or the operators who have chosen those particular areas. But you raise a very, very important part, and this is something I think I can correlate Nigeria to the United States in their carbon capture journey. They're mostly focusing on land carbon capture. So their main concern, one of their concerns, is actually the contamination of freshwater aquifers through leakage. You're always want to store it in a saline aquifer, but if that leaked into your farm water supplies for your farming or direct human consumption, that would obviously be a big problem. So that's why a lot of companies are looking at the offshore environment as a sort of safer bet to avoid that particular problem. And I think that's what's probably driving the North Sea. Basically, you have countries that have water nearby, the industries are near the water, so it does make more sense in the North Sea. I don't think it will make a lot of sense in Nigeria to really use the shallow aquifers in the shallow water. I think that part of the story is not relevant for sure, and that we would what we could maybe bring is We don't do land acquisition, but we certainly process land data. We can help on that front. But that you definitely hit a significant concern that needs to be addressed. And again, we'll need to look at the data and how we process it, how we image it, to understand what those risks are and who might be affected by the contamination, if indeed it's a serious problem. Which, bear in mind, if the CO2 is very, very clean, is a fairly inert gas, really. So it's not really going to poison people directly. It'll probably be the residual gases, contaminants of the CO2, which would be the danger. Not that I'm suggesting we should pollute water, but it depends on the purity of the CO2. As for shearwater in Africa, we've shot many surveys in Angola, 40 surveys in...
Thanks. That was a good question about why are we not in Nigeria. We're here today. And I can assure you that Africa as a whole is a real cornerstone of our business. The core of our business is conventional streamer acquisition and nodal acquisition. And as Ed referred to earlier on, we are working year in, year out across West Africa. We've got boats right now in Namibia. I think we're hoping to come up to Ivory Coast. We're keen to get into Nigeria. We've got a local partner, Arbex Geosolutions, and we think we've got the right technologies for the industry here in Nigeria, both now and in the future. So we're very much here, and we intend to be. We're looking to develop our business in Nigeria.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any questions from the audience here? Yes. Please tell us your name and your affiliation.
Okay.
Mr. Tony Akinsho, FNAPE, is the publisher of Africa Oil and Gas Journal, which I'm sure you've heard about. Yes, that's the man behind it all.
Okay, Mecca. My name is Emeka Ezekwelu. My affiliate is Lumberjee. My mentor is right there, the chairman. He brought me up. Okay, so thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I need to ask this question based on my background also, practically. When you talk about acquisition, processing, and you have to balance the two with the users, what they see, the interpreters, because the essence of this is to have a good interpretation that will give us quality results for decision making. So, looking at this from the presentation, at what point, or what is the thin line, for example, you can advise somebody you need to make reacquisition of your assessment. The reason I'm saying this is because I know there are some reprocessing techniques that will actually help you. And most times you find out that some users, once they see data and the data is getting bad, they will opt for reacquisition. And their challenge is money. So if they come to you, you normally just take it for reacquisition, or at the items you look at and tell them, listen, you need to reprocess. So I wanted to balance the business as well as the contribution in the industry and the quality. Then to join that question is money, because you want to make revenue, and you also look at quality. So when you mention cost cutting during your presentation, how do you marry your cost cutting with the cost? Okay, you are putting into your technology, demand, as well as most users will tell you, I don't have money. Do you tend to compromise quality, or what do you do in terms of cost cutting and the quality of the service you do? Thank you so much.
Yeah, you raised an excellent point there. I think for sure the first task is to use everything we possibly can to use the data that's already available to minimize the costs going forward. You're right, acquisition could be an expensive option. What we can do as companies, if there's no resort, like with the endurance example I showed you, they had the data, it was processed perfectly well for its chosen target, which was deeper oil and gas reservoir exploration, standard stuff. It was reprocessed with the shallow in the mine. They pushed the data as much as they could. And then they came to the barrier that was still uncertainty, so they were then, well, for lack of a better word, forced to acquire new data. It may not have been strictly necessary. I think when if you look at these as pilot projects, they're trying to learn and